Meredith Winston here from Paper Canteen Creations, and I'm here today on the Odd Girl blog to show you how to do some at-home embellishments that I've learned along the way from some great crafty friends. And my first embellishment that I'm going to show you is a rolled flower that you can do without having to use any die cutting system or any dies that you have. I know that there are some wonderful dies out there on the market. My favorite are the My Favorite Things brand. But in case you don't have any of those or you don't have a die cutting system, here's a way to do a nice rolled flower just simply by hand. And I learned this technique from my friend Joanne, who did a wonderful tutorial a long time ago on rolled flowers. So I have a square piece of felt, and I'm just going to trim the edges off. You could do this with paper, burlap, plastic, any of those anything really. I'm just going to cut a rough circle, just taking any pointy edges off, and I'm going to start trimming a spiral, starting at the outside edge and working my way in. And then when the spiral is all done, I'm going to take my needle nose pliers, and I'm going to pinch the edge, the outer edge where we started cutting, and I'm going to start twisting the flower around itself, making sure to keep it at the top of the needle nose pliers. And I'm going to pop it off the pliers at some point, just because it does start to get too bulky, and I'm going to start rolling it by hand around and around itself, and you just kind of tuck and roll as it goes. And I'm going to use my hot glue gun to adhere the bottom part of it. And there you have your sweet little rolled flower. And you can look, see if there are any edges that need trimming. Mine seems to be okay. And you can add that again. Now you can add it with a foam dot or a glue dot or hot glue onto your project. Okay, my next embellishment is going to be a really sweet chipboard star that I'm going to coat with craft ink and then ultra thick embossing enamel, and we're going to do a crackle technique that you don't have to have crackle paint for. Any good quality embossing powder will do. The ultra thick tends to crack a little bit more dramatically than regular embossing powder, but you can use regular embossing powder and just do a few more layers. So I have always struggled with chipboard. I love when I see it covered in paper, but my edges never seem to come out nice, so I tend to shy away from doing that technique. But with ink, you can get really great coverage. So today I'm going to use my Versacolor in Boysenberry. So I'm going to take my ink pad, and I'm using my Ranger craft sheet. So it cleans up very easily, it's heat resistant, it's waterproof. So I tend to just apply directly to my chipboard. So I'm just adding a very generous layer to it. It's okay, go ahead and get inky. That's what it's all about. And then I'm going to just take a scrap piece of cardstock. I'm going to lay it down so cleaning up my ultra thick enamel will be easy. So I'm using my ultra thick embossing enamel, or you'll see it written as UT, sometimes UTEE. And I'm putting a very heavy, generous coat right on top. I'm going to give it a little shake. And I will free my chipboard embellishment from that pile. I'm just going to set it aside really quickly so I can move this, because the last thing you want to do is turn on your heat gun when you have any kind of embossing powder laying around, because it makes just a giant mess. So I'm going to turn on my heat gun, which is going to get a little bit loud. Just making sure it's warm enough. And then go ahead, and you're going to see it's going to start to really melt that embossing enamel. And because it's the thick embossing enamel, it comes out really wet looking, which is really nice. Definitely takes a little bit longer to dry than your fine embossing enamel. So that's the first coat, and I'll show you here. Oops. It looks rather bumpy and really wet looking, which is fine. It will, the thicker you go, the smoother the consistency you get. So I'm going to go ahead and ink it up again. And I'm going to repeat this process about 3 or 4 times. Okay, so I've just finished my 4th and final coating of my pigment ink, my craft ink, and my ultra thick embossing enamel. So now it's off to the freezer for my little star here, and I will be back to show you what happens after it comes out of the freezer. Okay, hello again. We are back, and I've taken my star out of the freezer. You can see it's considerably less shiny because it has a fog on it now because it just literally came out of the freezer. So all I'm going to do to crackle this is just sort of bend gently. You'll hear it snapping. We just do a little bit of cracking here and there. You want to be careful not to bend it too much because you don't want to break the chipboard that's underneath. Okay, so now we have a super cool, crackled, let me wipe all the fog off it from the freezer. Gotta crack that middle part. Okay, so you have a super cool, sort of punky looking, crackled, glazed up chipboard embellishment that you did all by yourself. Isn't that cute? Isn't that cool? Okay, so we'll set that aside. My next DIY embellishment I learned when I took a class with Jennifer McGuire, and we're going to create a chipboard embellishment out of paper. So I've used my Distress ink in Vintage Photo and an ink blending tool, and I've trimmed out a whole bunch of these stars using the MFT Stacking Stars Dynamics. And you'll notice I've used craft cardstock, just a basic, nothing fancy, craft cardstock, and I have 5 of them over here that are sponged rather heavily, and one that I took a lot more care, because this is going to be the top star, if you will, so you don't want it to be too messy looking. So I'm using my glossy accents, which I use quite often as a glue, in addition to the glossy medium that it's meant for. And I start with just one of my stars. I put a very thin, just a very small coating here. I'll show you up close. Just a little bit of the glossy accents. You don't need a ton because you don't want it squishing out of the sides. And you want to use something like a glossy accents or some other kind of liquid glue that will give you a little bit of wiggle room before it dries. You'll notice I'm not using hot glue on this specifically for that reason, because it will dry very quickly and it won't allow you to sort of move your stars around and place them. So what I'm doing is I'm just stacking my stars up, one on top of another, and I've edged, like the reason I've sponged the edges before, you could do it after, definitely. I just like the rich depth that you get when you sponge your the stars ahead of time. I'm just holding them in place while that glossy accents dries, just enough to allow me to continue adding my next layer. I've chosen to do 6 layers. You could absolutely do more depending on how thick you'd like your embellishment to be. I'm just holding it down. And now I'm going to add my 5th layer. I'm holding it down. Okay, see, it's already starting to take on a nice thickness to it. It gives it a little bit more texture, a little bit more depth when placed on a project than just a flat star, which are wonderful depending on what you're creating. Okay, and I've placed my 6th star that I had sort of held off to the side and sponged a little bit more carefully. You will get a little bit of glossy accents squirting out the sides of the star, so I just usually run my hands over each point to make sure there's anything too blobby sticking out. And there you have your chipboard, faux chipboard embellishment made out of craft cardstock. Now you can use, obviously, any color cardstock. You could do layers of white and do one craft on top, but then you would see the edges that are white if you don't sponge them. But you could do a lot of different things with this. You could use a lot of different textures, a lot of different cardstocks. Okay, so that is our chipboard